You and I and most other dungeon masters are the same. We want our games to be fun. We want our players to be happy. But sometimes we just feel lost, confused, and unsure of how to accomplish those goals. So today we're going to be talking about the 3 keys to running a fun game of D&D. Now these 3 keys are usually just referred to as the 3 pillars of play or 3 pillars of adventuring. And they apply not only to D&D, but many other tabletop RPGs. And there is a reason why the game is intended to be built and ran based on these 3 pillars. They make the game more fun. And even more importantly, including all 3 pillars in your game makes it even more fun. Squeaky, I'm gonna pound on you. What are you doing down there? I want to be on camera. And Squeaky visits us on camera because he won't leave me alone. Oh, my belly rubbed. You're not, nobody's rubbing your belly, you big baby. Now you probably know about combat and social interactions as 2 of the pillars, even though 90% of the world erroneously refers to social interactions as role-playing. But don't worry, stick around, I'll rant about that in a little bit. But you might not know about exploration, the last pillar. Okay, yes, you know that exploration is the 3rd pillar. You've heard of exploration. But do you know what it actually means? And do you know how to implement it in your game? So today we're going to deep dive into each of the 3 pillars, going over what they are, why they make the game more fun, and how to implement them in your games. By the way, if you're looking for 5th edition resources to use in your D&D games, my latest Kickstarter, Layers and Legends, is launching soon. Backers will get 2 beautiful hardcover books, Layers and Legends and Loot and Lore, full of adventures for levels 1 through 15, traps, puzzles, new monsters, NPCs, villains, standalone encounters, and other Dungeon Master resources, all 100% 5th edition compatible. Click the link below to join the Layers and Legends email list. You'll get notified when the project launches and for special offers. Number 1, social interactions. Have you ever heard someone say they love the role-playing part of D&D? Chances are they're actually talking about social interactions, which is when your characters are interacting with NPCs in the game world, usually with talkie-talkie. Jim Bob goes to Sally the Armorer to get a new set of plate mail, and they chat a bit. Barbara the Bard leads the conversation with the quest giver NPC, haggling over the reward. These are all social interactions. Now, they may or may not involve speaking in special voices or accents, and they may or may not involve speaking in character. Both are distinct possibilities, of course, and quite optional based on personal play preferences. But the core of social interaction is a conversation between the PCs and NPCs. And as a quick reminder, monsters and enemies are NPCs as well. Now, social interactions do tend to appeal the most to thespian players. That is, people who love the theatrical aspect of getting in character, usually speaking in a special voice that they don just for that character, and then interacting with NPCs while they pretend to be their character as they talk. However, that's not to say that social interaction won't appeal to other sorts of players. In fact, even if you don't have thespians in your group, I'm sure that at least some of your players will dig interacting with NPCs. Shoot, half the time the fun of interacting with an NPC is just making fun of their unpronounceable name. Come on, you know it is. Or acting like a bad mamma jamma you'd like to think you are by verbally walking over an NPC. The reasons vary, but social interactions appeal to lots of players. So, how do you implement social interactions in your game? The pitfall that I see many groups falling into is that social interactions are strictly confined to the town. And once the group is in the dungeon, there are no social interactions. In town, they talk to the blacksmith, the grocer, the street urchin, the NPC quest giver. But once they get to the dungeon, it's all snooping and slaying, exploration and combat. I try to always have 1 or 2 potential social interactions inside the dungeon. Okay, I know. Stop yelling at me. I know that the encounters in a dungeon don't have to be combat. I know that the encounters might be resolved by diplomacy, but I wouldn't count on that. Players often just kill first and speak with dead later, until they forget about it or other pressing matters make it prohibitive. something like that. So, intentionally build social interactions into your adventures. There are kobold cooks in the kitchen who do not want to fight and instead cower in the corner. PCs could slaughter them or talk with them and discover they're slaves of the orcs. Cool! Now they get to set them free, get some inside information, and are better informed as they delve deeper. And a simple technique you can use in almost any combat encounter is to have the villains carry on conversations with the characters as they fight. Just a few sentences each round, but there is no reason you need to let combat halt the possibility of social interaction. In fact, both at once rather makes the whole affair much better because you're hitting two pillars at once. By the way, if you're enjoying this video or just like bacon, please give me a thumbs up and let me know down in the comments what other food goes best with bacon. In fact, entire bacon recipes are 100% welcome. Your love for bacon is appreciated. Another pitfall I see is games that are almost 100% social interactions. These kind of seem to be a trend these days, especially on Twitch, where it seems like almost every D&D game is trying to be the next Critical Role. And I'm sure it happens in non-streamed games too. But why? Well, because lots of us watch D&D shows like Critical Role or High Rollers or whatnot. We see them doing lots of social interactions and talking in character, and we just assume that's the optimal way to run a D&D game. Well, it might be, depending on your player's preferences, but it might be a horrible way to run your game too. And I know those shows have combat and exploration too, but come on, they do tend to emphasize social interactions. A lot of them are voice actors, and that's kind of what they do best. My advice is to not assume that what works for a popular D&D show will work for your D&D game, nor to assume that your players will have the same preferences as the actors on those shows. Finally, I think lots of groups tend toward having lots of social interactions because it is the easiest way for a dungeon master to run a game. Filling up a game session and table time with talkie-talkie with a variety of NPCs requires the least amount of prep time and planning from the game master. On the other hand, developing well thought out adventures and dungeons that feature good exploration and encounters is far more challenging. Oh, that's right. I did promise you a rant on people saying role-playing when they really mean social interactions, didn't I? Well, here we go. The entire game is role-playing. When you talk to the shopkeeper with a funny voice, you're role-playing. When you swing a sword because you're a fighter instead of casting a spell, you're role-playing. When you're sneaking into the room, opening the chest, and checking it for a false bottom, you're role-playing. The entire game is role-playing. So please, can we just start saying social interactions instead? Shoot, I'd even settle for talkie-talkie, a term I rather like, or whatever else you want to call it. Just not role-playing. Talkie-talkie is just a subset of role-playing. There, satisfied, there's my rant. Was that good enough? Was that dramatic enough? Did I make my point? Lots of people are like, unsubscribe, you suck, goodbye. Welcome. And goodbye, I guess. Number 2, combat. Let us define combat, shall we? When words fail you, you roll a 1 on your persuasion check, or you just feel like being a murder hobo. Combat is when you resort to physical violence to achieve your goals. You murder those orcs who wouldn't give you the MacGuffin that you so desperately need. You beat the tar out of the owner of the magic shop who had the nerve to not just give you all the loots. Yeah, I think we know what combat is. 90% of the rules in the D&D core books have to do with combat. You know what? If you're not sure what combat is, please let us know down in the comments, and we'll meet you out in the parking lot for an in-depth explanation. Tommy will take you out and back and beat you over the head with a tack hammer. You guys know that movie? It's a good movie. So, what makes combat fun for us? Besides that we are an inherently violent species that values power perhaps above all else? First, combat allows us to do really cool stuff. We can live our superhero fantasies in a real way. Well, it's a game, it's kind of real. We are no longer impotent workers sitting in a cubicle just doing what the boss tells us. No, we are smashing that hobgoblin in the face with a hammer. We are casting spells that lay our enemies low and leave us standing above them in victory. Combat makes us feel special, feel powerful, and thus speaks to this sort of primal urge we have to not be weak and not be unimportant. We all want to be loved, The feeling of awesomeness of winning a combat is a flavor of that. And what if you usually lose your combats? Well, sorry. He's like, Luke, I always lose. I suck in the game as much as I suck in real life. Ah! Yeah, I probably don't have a solution for you. Combat also appeals to those who love problem solving and tactics. Playing a combat in D&D is very much like a chess game, only perhaps with more moving pieces and more complexity. I'm sure some chess snobs and grandmasters will be offended about that. I don't know, but it sure seems like movement on a board, plus weapons, plus spells, makes things a bit more complex than a chess game. If I'm wrong and I just offended you, yell at me in the comments. I'm sure this isn't your first rodeo on YouTube. Anyway, for what it's worth, combat is probably my favorite part of the game when I'm a player, followed by social interactions. Of course, when I'm a game master, I tend to like all three pillars equally for some strange reason. Combat pitfalls. Okay, the pitfall with combat is essentially the same pitfall as with social interactions. Having a game that is almost all combat. Now, I'm not sure if there is a particular reason this sometimes seems to happen, but it can. It might have to do with D&D's wargaming roots. It might be because most of the rules deal with combat. It might be because we're role-playing fantasy warriors in a world filled with monsters that want to kill us. I don't know, take your pick. At any rate, my suggestion is to steer away from a game that is mostly just combat, unless you know that that's what your players all want to play. But my guess is that some of your players, even though they like combat, would still like some of the other two pillars as well. Another reason to mix the pillars up as well is that combat is very high intensity, at least mentally, and players need a break from that, a la social interactions and exploration. Or they will force a break, a la side conversations and snack breaks. There's nothing wrong with snack breaks. Pizza, nachos, burritos, bacon, like just there's a wide variety of reasons you would have a snack break that has nothing to do with the game that's too much. I'll be right back. How to implement combat. Well, here's the thing. You, the Dungeon Master, don't really need to worry too much about implementing combat in your game. As long as you create encounters that contain monsters, villains, bad guys, your players will likely turn many of those encounters into combats for you when they get tired of talking, decide that, surprise, surprise, the goblins probably aren't going to stop attacking caravans just because the barbarian flexed his muscles, and that squashing them is going to be faster and probably a lot more fun than continuing a discussion that's going nowhere. However, I do suggest that you start most encounters as a social interaction where the bad guys try to talk to the characters first. Allow the possibility for the players to resolve the encounter in a different way than blood and violence. Let your players decide when it turns into a physical altercation, but not always. Sometimes bad guys do just attack. Number 3, exploration. There appears to be a huge misconception out there that exploration is just overland travel. You know, after you talk to the NPC quest giver and figure out what needs doing, you still need to travel to the deep dark dungeon located north of town. And that journey from the town to the dungeon, well, that's exploration. No, that's overland travel, which can arguably be one of the least interesting parts of the game, and a topic for another day, but it's certainly not exploration. I mean, overland travel can involve exploration, such as when you come across an old abandoned tower and want to poke around, but it isn't exploration in and of itself. The exploration pillar happens all the time in adventures. It's walking down the hallway, spotting the burned corpse, and searching around for traps. It's finding the holes in the walls, noticing scorch marks, and then sending the rogue forward to sort things out so you don't all die. It's inspecting the chest for false bottoms. It's analyzing all the elements of the puzzle, preventing the door from opening, and figuring out the solution. Exploration is equal parts searching, analyzing, and problem solving. And that can happen when you're out of doors, when you're going from point A to point B, but it usually happens in dungeons or other locations where the meat of an adventure takes place. Exploration derives its fun in part because it involves mystery, suspense, and problem solving, which are, for reasons unbeknownst to me, some human beings seem to enjoy, but in large part because of the payoff. It's the thrill of finding the trap, and not blowing yourself up. It's the excitement of discovering the magic item under the chest's false bottom. It's the satisfaction of solving that complex puzzle and being able to progress forward. Now, much of exploration isn't super exciting. It's checking for traps, searching doors, it's poking around, it's trying and trying and trying until it works. It's like a suspense movie where you know a murderer in a mask is going to jump out at the protagonist. Just don't know when. But when it does happen, it's cool as crap. You just have to wait for it. Implementing exploration in your game isn't too hard either. It just takes some planning and foresight. Make sure your dungeon has a secret door or two, a hidden hallway that is a shortcut to the big bad, and would allow the PCs to bypass an encounter. A chest hidden under a pile of stones at the bottom of the sewer channel that contains a cool magic item. Don't ask me why it's there. Paranoid kobolds, I don't know. Throw a riddle or puzzle into the adventure, add a trap or two, and of course, don't forget the payoff. Sometimes the payoff is baked in. Finding and bypassing the trap means you don't get murderized. Other times, you will need to add the payoff. What is that magic item in the chest at the bottom of the sewer channel? Channel? Canal? Probably channel. Probably both. Could be both. I don't know. I just work here. I just read what's on the teleprompter. Click on the screen now to learn how to stop metagaming once and for all, or to join the Lair and Legends email list and get notified when the project launches. And until next time, eat bacon!